Hi there, and welcome to Out There, a cryptid podcast. I'm Josh, and today we're revisiting one of the most terrifying cryptids in North America. A creature so massive, people say it looks like a small airplane in the sky. And the reason we're revisiting it? Because sightings never actually stopped. We're talking about the Thunderbird. Let's dive in. Seeing as this was the first ever episode of Out There, it felt right that we revisited this iconic case. Not only is it one of my favorite cryptids, but it's a cryptid that is still being cited today. So sit back, relearn some things about the Thunderbird, and learn some of the new sightings taking place. The Thunderbird isn't a new cryptid or story. It didn't start in the 1970s, and it definitely didn't start with the internet. There's something people have been describing for hundreds of years, across different states, different countries, and even different cultures. And somehow the details keep lining up. Massive birds, way too big to make sense, gliding overhead completely silent. And the strange part isn't just what they're seeing, it's how often keeps happening. But there's a problem with seeing something in the sky. You almost never have anything to compare it to. No scale, no reference point. So when someone says they saw something the size of a plane, was it really that big, or did it just feel that way? Across different stories and time periods, there are a few details that keep showing up again and again when people describe the Thunderbird. Most accounts describe something massive in size, with wingspans ranging from anywhere between 15 feet to estimates that go far beyond anything known in modern birds. The coloration is usually dark, often black or deep brown, and the body is described as heavy and powerful rather than small or delicate. Many reports mention a hooked beak and large talons, sometimes compared to birds of prey, but on a much larger scale than anything that exists today. In some cases, witnesses even describe small variations like lighter marking around the neck area, but overall image stays consistent. Another detail that appears in a lot of accounts is how it moves. Instead of constantly flapping like most large birds, it's often described as gliding through the sky, with very little visible effort, almost like it's riding air currents instead of actively flying. People also frequently compare it to something prehistoric, closer to what they imagine a pterodactyl might look like than any known species of bird today. Even though the exact details vary depending on the witness and the time period, the core description stays surprisingly consistent across decades of reports, which is what makes these sightings so difficult to completely dismiss. But before the Thunderbird was a cryptid, before it was something people claimed to see flying over highways and small towns, it was something else entirely. Something people didn't just see, but believed in. In Native American folklore, the Thunderbird wasn't just some giant bird flying around. It was seen as a sacred being in the sky. Across a lot of different tribes, the Thunderbird was believed to control thunder, lightning, and storms, with some saying the sound of thunder actually came from its wings beating. It was incredibly powerful, with the ability to both give life and take it away. On one hand, it brought rain, which helped crops grow and provided water for entire communities. But on the other hand, those same storms could be destructive, dangerous, and even deadly. So it wasn't just viewed as purely good or evil, it represented the balance of nature. Different tribes had their own interpretations of what the Thunderbird actually was. Groups like the Winnebago tribe and the Menominee tribe saw it as a powerful spirit or protector, something that could defend people from evil forces or other creatures. In some traditions, it even acted as a kind of enforcer, keeping order between the sky and other parts of the natural world, like the water or even the underworld. That's why you'll often see the Thunderbird represented on totem poles, especially in Pacific Northwest cultures, usually placed at the top as a symbol of power and protection. But one interesting thing to know is that not every tribe believed the Thunderbird was a physical creature. For many, it wasn't something you could just see flying overhead. It was more of a spiritual force or a representation of nature itself. Others believed it could take on physical form when needed. And that difference is huge, because it means the idea of the Thunderbird as a literal giant bird might actually be more of a modern interpretation. Originally, it was something much bigger than that. It was less of an animal and more of a presence that controlled the sky. As European settlers spread across North America in the 1800s and early 1900s, the stories started to shift. What had once been described as something spiritual began to sound much more physical. People weren't just talking about a force of nature anymore. They were claiming to actually see something in the sky. Reports started coming in of massive birds with enormous wingspans, sometimes estimated anywhere between 15 to 30 feet, and in more extreme cases, even larger. Some witnesses described them as dark and bird-like, while others said they looked almost bat-like with smooth bodies and no visible feathers. What's interesting is that even this early on, people were already comparing them to something more prehistoric, like something that shouldn't still exist. One of the most famous and debated stories comes out of Arizona in the late 1800s, where two ranchers claimed they saw a massive flying creature, shot it, and brought it back to town. According to the reports, it had wings like a bat, an almost reptilian-like head, and a wingspan so large it was described as being the length of a barn. Some versions of the story even say there was a photograph taken of the creature, showing it pinned up against a wall with several men standing under it for scale. That photo has never been found, but the story stuck around. Now, some of these details get exaggerated, especially when you start hearing about wingspans that sound almost impossible. But even if you strip it down to the basics, the core of these stories stay the same. Large flying creatures, bigger than anything people were familiar with, being seen by multiple witnesses across different areas. And during this time, a lot of the country, especially out west, was still relatively unexplored, and people were actively discovering fossils and evidence of prehistoric life. So, when something massive showed up in the sky, it didn't feel impossible. It felt like something that maybe wasn't supposed to still be there. And that's where the shift happens. Because from this point on, the Thunderbird isn't just something people believe in. It becomes something people think they could actually see, chase, and prove was real. And hope never got aggressive. Moving forward into the 1940s, the sightings started to feel less like isolated frontier stories and more like something that is actually being seen by multiple people. In 1944, around the Pittsburgh area, including towns like Braddock and Clairton, witnesses reported seeing a huge prehistoric-looking bird in the sky, with wings so large it was described as blocking out part of the horizon. One witness, James Runco, described it as something that looked like it should not exist in modern times. A few years later, in April of 1948, in Overland, Illinois, 3 separate witnesses reported a massive bird flying overhead that they compared to the size of a small airplane. Around the same time, in nearby Alton, Illinois, a father and son described a similar encounter where a large bird came close enough to be seen in detail, again, being compared to an aircraft like a Piper Cub. What makes this period interesting is that these reports are happening in the same general region within a short time frame, almost like a cluster of sightings instead of completely random events. By the 1960s and early 1970s, reports continued to show up across places like Washington, Utah, and Idaho, with people still describing extremely large birds with wingspans that seem closer to airplanes rather than a natural world creature. Some accounts even mention possible physical traces, although nothing has ever been confirmed. What stands out across all of this is that the description stays surprisingly consistent, not only over time, but over many places. Massive wings, dark bodies, and silent gliding flights. And by the time you get closer to the 1970s, it feels less like scattered folklore and more like something that has been slowly building in the background for decades. And even with all these scattered reports, nothing ever really breaks through in a way that makes it undeniable. It stays in the strange space of consistent stories without solid proof, like something always just out of reach. But then, everything changes with this cryptid. Because by the late 1970s, one of these reports doesn't just stay a story in passing. It happens in a very specific place, to very specific people. And this time, it isn't just a sighting anymore. It's an incident where someone is in real danger. And for the first time, it feels almost impossible to dismiss. On July 25th, 1977, in a small rural area near Lawndale, Illinois, what would become one of the most well-known Thunderbird encounters takes place. It is late afternoon in the summer, and the Lowe family is outside their home going about a normal day. The family includes Ruth and her 10-year-old son, Marlon, who is playing outside near the house. The area is quiet, rural, and open, with very little around except farmland and residential space. The kind of place where you can see far into the distance in every direction. According to later reports, everything changes in a matter of seconds. Ruth is inside the house when she suddenly hears her son screaming from outside. She immediately runs out, expecting a normal accident or injury. But what she sees is something she later describes as impossible to process in the moment. 2 extremely large birds are in the area near her son. Witnesses, and her own account, describe them as dark, oversized, and nothing like any normal bird found in the region. The birds are moving directly toward Marlon, and the situation escalates quickly. In the chaos, one of the birds gets close enough to physically grab him. Marlon, who is around 55 pounds at the time, is reportedly lifted off the ground by his clothing, with the bird gaining enough height to carry him several feet into the air. Ruth runs toward them immediately. She begins trying to fight the birds off using whatever she can reach, including striking at them and throwing objects from the ground. The interaction is described as loud, chaotic, and terrifying, with the birds circling and attempting to maintain control of the situation. After a short distance of being carried, estimated at around 20 to 30 feet, the bird drops Marlon back to the ground and fly off. Marlon survives the incident, and Ruth immediately takes him to report what happened. When they arrive at the local police station, their account is met with skepticism. Officers reportedly dismiss the story, and no official action is taken at the time. Despite this, Ruth provides a detailed description of what she saw, including a large dark body, a white ring or marking around the neck area, a hooked beak, and extremely large wings that she estimated at several feet across on each side. The total body length, according to her description, was several feet from beak to tail. In the aftermath, the story spread quickly through the local community. Instead of being treated as a credible incident, the family reportedly became the subject of ridicule. Marlin was mocked by their children and residents, and the family became socially isolated. What makes this part of the story especially significant is not just the incident itself, but how the town responded to it, with disbelief turning into public harassment. Unlike what you would expect from an incident this strange, the 1977 Lawndale case didn't immediately explode into national headlines or major news coverage. There are no confirmed mainstream news articles from the time that directly report the story as a documented event, and it doesn't appear to have been picked up by any major outlets in an official capacity. Instead, what seems to have happened is that the story stayed local. It spread through the word of mouth in and around Lawndale, Illinois, where it was discussed more as a disturbing rumor than a verified incident. It wasn't until years later that the story began to resurface. By the 1990s and early 2000s, it started appearing in cryptozoology books and paranormal compilations, usually grouped in with other Thunderbird sightings from across North America. From there, it spread further through early internet forums and websites, where users began repeating it and reshaping the account into the version most people recognize today. Television shows and documentary-style series like Monster Quest eventually helped amplify it even more. But by that point, the story had already been circulating in niche communities for years. So instead of a single breaking news moment, the Lawndale incident slowly evolved into something much stranger. A story that never really had a confirmed starting point in mainstream media, but also never fully disappeared. But with no physical evidence confirmed and no official classification, the Lawndale case became one of the most frequently cited modern Thunderbird encounters, mainly because of the level of detail, the number of witnesses involved, and the fact that it involved a direct physical interaction rather than just a sighting. And of course, this cryptid story didn't stop there. On July 30th, 1977, just a few days after the Lawndale incident, John A.J. Huffer, who also went by Texas John Huffer, was out on a fishing trip with his son Jason near Lake Shelbyville in central Illinois. According to his account, they noticed two very large birds perched in a tree near the water. Huffer grabbed a 16mm film camera he had with him and began recording as the birds sat there for a moment before a loud horn from the boat startled them and they took off into the air. In the footage, the birds appear as large dark shapes lifting off from the tree line. Huffer claimed the size difference between the two was noticeable, estimating the larger one at around 18-foot wingspan and the smaller one at roughly 14 feet. He described them as heavy, powerful gliders rather than birds that were actively flapping, rising into the air and moving away in a smooth motion. Here's the thing. The Marlin incident happened in Lawndale, Illinois, and this sighting took place only roughly 70 to 90 miles away, within just a few days of each other. So, is it possible that this was the same bird that tried to take Marlin? Now, the Department of Conservation later reviewed the footage and officially dismissed it, stating that the birds were most likely a turkey vulture, which are common in the region. However, the identification was immediately disputed by some wildlife observers and cryptid researchers. They point out that the proportions in the footage seemed off for turkey vultures, especially in the tail shape and overall silhouette. Despite this, no alternative official identification was ever accepted, and the footage was ultimately categorized as an unresolved or misidentified wildlife recording, rather than evidence of anything unknown. The media reaction at the time was very minimal. There was no national news coverage or major headlines, and the footage circulated quietly for years before being picked up by paranormal researchers and later documentary-style shows and online communities. Like in the Lawndale case, the attention came long after the fact, spreading through reputation rather than official validation. What it leaves behind is a strange connection between the two events, and the happenings within the same week and in the same region, both describing massive birds that never fully received a satisfying explanation. But moving along the timeline, in June and July of 2001, there were a couple of pretty interesting sightings coming out of Pennsylvania that fit right into the same pattern of reports. On June 13th, a resident in Greenville, Pennsylvania, said they looked up and saw what they first thought was either a small plane or an ultralight aircraft because of how large it was in the sky. But as it got closer, and they watched it for around 20 minutes, they realized it was some kind of massive bird. They described it as grayish black, fully covered in feathers, and with a wingspan they estimated at about 15 feet, and a body around 5 feet long. At one point, it even landed in a tree nearby, and stayed there for about 15 minutes before taking off again and flying south. A neighbor later said they saw something similar the next day, and called it the biggest bird they had ever seen. Then, about 3 weeks later, on July 6th, there was another report out of Erie County, Pennsylvania, also referenced in 14 times. This one described a very similar looking bird with a wingspan estimated between 15 to 17 feet. The witness said it was dark gray, had little to no visible neck, a dark circular marking under the head, and a thin, long beak that they estimated was almost a foot long. None of these sightings were ever officially confirmed or explained, but they added to the same ongoing pattern of people in different places describing unusually large birds that didn't quite match anything known in modern wildlife. But then, on the evening of Tuesday, September 25th, 2001, there was another reported sighting in South Greensburg, Pennsylvania, that adds even more detail to this pattern of encounters. A 19-year-old witness claimed they were driving along Route 119 when they were suddenly drawn to the sky by a sound they described as sounding like flags flapping in a thunderstorm. When they looked up, they saw what they believed was a massive winged creature moving overhead. The witness estimated the wingspan at around 10 to 15 feet, with a head that they described as being unusually large, possibly around 3 feet long. They said the creature was flying relatively low, around 50 to 60 feet above the ground, and that it was not flapping its wings smoothly like a normal bird. Instead, it was described as almost awkward or heavy in motion, with slow, forceful wing beats followed by periods of gliding as it passed over traffic on the road below. At one point, the witness said the creature landed briefly in a dead tree, which visibly bent under its weight before it took off again. The entire encounter lasted around 90 seconds. According to the account, there were no other confirmed witnesses, no physical evidence found afterward, even after the area was searched. Still, it was later recorded by researcher Dennis Smeltzer and added to the growing list of modern Thunderbird reports that continue to show up in different states, time periods, often with very similar descriptions despite the lack of any official explanation. Now, fast forwarding a little, another report came out of a completely different part of the country. In 2008, near Golden, Colorado, a man who only identified himself as Kirk claims he witnessed something extremely unusual while a storm was moving through the area. He says he saw what looked like a massive bird-like figure moving along the leading edge of an incoming thunderstorm as it came out of Clear Creek Canyon. According to his account, it wasn't just flying through the weather, but seemed to be gliding with it, staying right along the front of the storm, without any clear signs of flapping its wings. Kirk described the creature as enormous and dark in color, and he compared its size to the large birds already in the area, like turkey vultures, which he estimated were around 4 to 6 feet across. Based on that comparison, he believed that the large figure he saw had a wingspan somewhere in the range of 48 to 72 feet, something he described as absolutely immense. He said it appeared to move smoothly and continuously through the sky, almost like it was riding the storm itself. After seeing it, Kirk reportedly contacted the Colorado Division of Wildlife, but the report was ultimately dismissed and treated as likely a misidentification of known birds. Still, what makes this account stand out is how closely it matches earlier descriptions, especially the idea of a massive dark bird-like shape associated with storms, gliding without obvious wing movement, and appearing far larger than anything people normally expect to see in the sky. Plus, the fact that Colorado has a strong Native American history and presence, it would make sense if the Thunderbird was a legendary being to be here. In more recent years, there are still scattered reports that continue to show up in different parts of North America, keeping this pattern of sightings going well into modern times. In May of 2013, two friends walking through the woods near Bryn Athyn, Pennsylvania. The pair reported being startled by something unusual overhead. According to their account, they heard a loud noise and looked up to see a large black bird sitting above them. They said it appeared to notice them and took off shortly after, flying about 100 feet to a nearby branch. The witnesses estimated the wingspan at around 10 feet and described the creature as roughly 4 feet tall when perched, emphasizing how large it seemed compared to anything they normally see in the area. Then, in January of 2018, there was another reported sighting, this time in Alaska, where a woman driving claimed she saw a gigantic bird crossing the road ahead of her. She described its wingspan as being so large that it appeared nearly as wide as the road itself, which made the moment especially shocking given how close it was to her vehicle. Like many of the other accounts, there was no additional witnesses or physical evidence confirmed afterward, but the report adds to the ongoing pattern of similar descriptions appearing across completely different locations and time periods. And what is interesting is that when you look at all of these reports together, the most consistent clusters seem to show up in places like Pennsylvania and Illinois. And it's a little unexpected, since those are not exactly the regions people would typically associate with a giant bird tied to Native American folklore, which makes the pattern stand out even more when you start mapping out everything. Before we read the first ever Reddit story that was read on Out there is also a compiled list of reported sightings on a site called the Great American Thunderbird Sightings Archive, where dozens of accounts from across the United States are grouped together. Now, I'm only going to highlight a couple, but most of them are short on details and kind of hard to verify. But they do show just how often these types of sightings continue to appear in different places over time. In 2007, in Colorado, a group of hikers reported seeing a massive bird soaring over a mountain peak with an estimated wingspan of around 14 feet and a dark brown body with what they described as a distinct red crest on its head. A few years later, in 2010, in British Columbia, a couple picnicking near a lake said they saw a large bird flying overhead with a wingspan estimated between 10 and 12 feet, light brown in color, and a noticeable white tail. Then, in 2014, in Oklahoma, a group of hunters in the woods came across a large bird perched on a tree branch, describing it as being covered in glossy black feathers with a wingspan close to 9 or 10 feet. And then, in 2017 in Montana, a driver traveling down a quiet highway reported seeing a massive bird sitting in a tree near the roadside, estimating its wingspan at around 12 to 14 feet, and noting a distinctive white crest on its head. None of these sightings were ever confirmed or officially explained, but together they continue to reinforce the same pattern. People in completely different places describing something unusually large in the sky that doesn't quite match anything known in modern wildlife. You can check out the website to read some other sightings of thunderbirds from around America. But now, let's get into the Reddit story that really kicked off all the ones we've covered before, and will continue to cover on Out There. This was posted about 6 years ago by the user Circus Masteretti. Really glad I found this thread. I always check back time to time to see what information I can find or updates in regards to the Thunderbird. At one point, I was super obsessed with finding answers about it. This is my very own up-close and personal account with this bird. I live in Canada, in the province of Ontario, in the city of Mississauga. It took place mid-December 2011, around 2 to 4 a.m., and it was shaping up to be a very green Christmas, as there wasn't snow on the ground at the time. Me, my brother, and a close friend went to smoke a joint out on my balcony, as I live on a mid-upper floor of an apartment building. As we sparked the joint, I see this dark black silhouette moving on top of the willow tree, which is on the building property. FYI, my balcony has the best view of it. We'll attach a picture for you guys. As I see this silhouette fluttering on the top crown canopy of the willow, I grab my brother and friend's attention, asking them if they can make out as to what the hell I'm seeing. Big WTF moment. Thought it was a big black tarp being animated by the wind flow. Once all three of us locked onto what we were seeing, things like wings, a neck, and the structure of a bird became very apparent. This thing seemed very restless as it kept pacing around the top canopy of the willow. During this time, cell phones had really bad night support cameras, as I'm sure many of you might remember. Trying to take videos at night with an iPhone 3GS, BlackBerry Bold, LG, and early Androids, especially if zoomed in, you were left with horrible grainy rubbish. We tried to capture it on camera from my balcony, which yielded the above mentioned. All three of us ran down to the ground floor. Man, the mere presence of this animal keeps your soul frozen. It's like you can't fathom something like this being thrown to you visually. It was in that moment that led me to discover what a natural high is in this world. And trust me, whatever effects the weed had yielded long dissipated from when I thought I was first looking at a black tarp caught on top of the tree. My bro and our friend made it about 6 feet away from the door that leads out from the building. These guys weren't mentally prepared for something like this, as they both tripped over each other from keeping their eyes glued to it. This animal is quite frightening, especially when you have to come to terms with the reality you now share with it, knowing it's living and breathing as you are. I choose to proceed closer to the tree until I got about 5 feet from it, and I couldn't approach any closer, as it shrieked a sound so intimidating and loud that it sounded like an eagle on steroids, but much deeper and sharper in terms of its pitch. I distinctly remember it going into a crouched position with its tail up, and its head charging downwards, with its wings up halfway opened and curled upwards. This bird is all black, with some red feathering near the face. Never felt that specific feeling of fear before. I ran back towards my bro and friend. The bird continued to get more restless and aggressive. It literally flapped its wings, hopped to the next building, which is about 4 stories high, with the willow is about 7 stories, and the distance between both places are less than 15 feet. It paced around there, agitated, then flew off again and disappeared. The wingspan was def 16 plus, easily, and it was about 8 to 10 feet tall. A lot of people share this type of experience with themselves. I was lucky enough to share it with 2 others. We told a few of our friends, and surprisingly, they believed us. I became really obsessed with finding answers. I even thought about calling the avian people who oversee the birds and wildlife, but didn't want them to think we were crazy or lying. Def found things that helped me understand more about the Thunderbird and my experience. Really appreciate the opportunity to have shared this with you guys. This is something I have carried with me and kept private, not leaving my immediate circle of friends. I even got a tattoo of Thunderbird to immortalize that day. One thing that stood out most was that it was at nighttime. I feel like it's evolved and adapted to being nocturnal. That's why it goes unnoticed during the day. Never seen another bird that active, let alone be in clear sight during the night, besides owls. This is one of those Reddit stories that really stands out, not because it's the only strange one, but because of how detailed and personal it feels compared to most of the others. What stand out most is not just what they saw, but the way they describe the experience itself. There is that shift from confusion to realization, and then straight into fear once they understood what they were actually looking at. That kind of emotional reaction shows up in a lot of these accounts, especially when people talk about how close the creature seemed or how unnatural its movement felt compared to any normal bird. It also lines up with a few other sightings in a few key ways. The size estimate, the dark coloring, and the overall idea of something large moving in a way that does not quite match known wildlife. All stay consistent with what we have already heard from places like Illinois and Pennsylvania. And just like those cases, there's no evidence left behind. No confirmation, just the account itself. And the fact that multiple people walked away believing they had seen the same thing. When you put it next to everything else, it doesn't feel like an isolated story. It feels like another piece in a much bigger pattern that keeps repeating in different places over time. And before we start trying to break down what any of this could actually be, it is worth pointing out how much the Thunderbird has stayed in the public eye through media over the years. This is not just something that exists in old folklore or scattered eyewitness reports. It is a cryptid that keeps getting revisited in documentaries and investigation shows. Programs like Monster Quest and other similar series have featured segments on giant bird sightings, including cases like the Illinois Report. And they often bring in researchers, wildlife experts, and cryptozoologists to debate what people might actually be seeing. Even shows like Expedition X and other modern paranormal series continue to reference similar sightings and revisit the idea that there may still be unexplained large bird encounters being reported today. None of these shows have ever confirmed anything definitively, but what they do show is that this story has never really disappeared. It just keeps getting brought back up, reanalyzed, and reintroduced to new audiences over time. But after hearing all of these stories, the big question becomes, what are people actually seeing? Because at the end of the day, there has never been any confirmed physical evidence of a Thunderbird. No body, no clear footage, no scientific classification. So while the stories are fascinating and surprisingly consistent in some ways, there are still a few possible explanations that could account for at least some of these sightings. One of the most realistic explanations is that at least some of these sightings could simply be misidentified large birds that already exist in North America. The biggest bird currently flying in North America is the California condor, which can have a wingspan reaching close to 10 feet. Now, they are massive soaring birds with dark bodies, and one detail that really stands out is how rarely they flap their wings while they fly, which lines up with a lot of Thunderbird descriptions we've talked about. Then you have birds like the bald eagle, the golden eagle, both of which are extremely large birds of prey with powerful wingspans, sharp talons, and intimidating appearances, especially if seen unexpectedly or from directly below. The important thing, though, is that even the largest known birds in North America are still much smaller than any Thunderbird reports. Most real birds top out somewhere between 7 to 10 feet in wingspan, while a lot of Thunderbird sightings claim sizes far beyond that. But perception also plays a huge role here. A large bird flying overhead with no clear point of reference can easily look much bigger than it actually is, especially in bad lighting, storm conditions, or moments where someone is startled and trying to process what they are seeing in real time. And even when you look outside of North America, at some of the largest birds in the world, nothing really comes close to the sizes people describe in a lot of these Thunderbird sightings. One bird that gets brought up pretty often is the Steller's sea eagle, which is one of the largest and most powerful eagles on Earth, with a wingspan that can reach over 8 feet. There are also massive vultures, sandhill cranes, of course, and other cranes, and other soaring birds around the world that can look absolutely enormous when seen in flight, especially from far away or against the sky. But even with all of those examples, there still is not a known bird species anywhere in the world that comes close to some of the claims made in these reports. Once people start describing wingspans of 15, 20, or even 70 feet, it moves far beyond anything recognized by modern science, which is part of why the Thunderbird legend has stayed so mysterious for so long. Another major contender for a known animal this cryptid could be is the turkey vulture. Turkey vultures are large, dark birds with wingspans that can reach anywhere from 6 to 7 feet. And similarly to the condor, these birds can soar through the sky for long periods of time without really flapping their wings. These birds are very common around America and are known to fly around busy roads in search of roadkill, seeing as they are scavengers. So it's very possible that these birds are being mistaken for the great Thunderbird. The same goes for large hawks and eagles and other birds of prey seen from far away. The lighting can hide details, silhouettes can distort shape, and when something is moving high above you with no clear reference point, it becomes a lot harder to accurately judge size. And honestly, a lot of classic Thunderbird's descriptions do overlap with real bird behavior and even physical descriptions. The dark coloration, the gliding movement, and the lack of visible wing flapping are all things that exist in known species already, which is why misidentification remains one of the strongest explanations. But that brings us to the next point, which honestly might be one of the biggest explanations behind a lot of cryptid sightings in general. And that is simply size and distance distortion. When something is high up in the sky, especially with no clear reference point around it, our brains are actually pretty bad at judging how large it really is. Depth perception starts to break down at a distance. Objects directly overhead can appear much larger than they actually are, and things like storm clouds, shadows, or backlighting can make silhouettes look more dramatic or unnatural. Movement also plays a huge role. A bird gliding high above you can appear slower, heavier, and more massive simply because of the distance between you and the object. And when you combine all of that with fear, surprise, or bad weather conditions, it becomes much easier to understand how a normal bird with a 6 to 8 foot wingspan could suddenly feel like something twice that size, or even larger in the moment. There are also environmental and psychological factors that could explain why so many of these sightings feel so intense and convincing to the people experiencing them. A huge number of reports happen during low light conditions like dusk, nighttime, or storms, which already makes it harder to clearly identify what someone is looking at. And storms especially are interesting because they have always been connected to Thunderbird legends in North American folklore. So, seeing a large bird during severe weather can immediately make the experience feel even more dramatic or supernatural. Fear and surprise can also completely change the way people process what they are seeing in the moment. If something suddenly appears overhead and catches you off guard, your brain is trying to make sense of it in real time, which can easily amplify how large, threatening, or unnatural it seems. And when there are multiple witnesses together, people can sometimes start feeding off of each other's reactions without even realizing it. One person saying, "That thing is huge," or "That doesn't look normal," can influence how the entire group interprets the experience afterward. But not all hope is lost for the people who believe there could be something more behind these sightings, because a lot of the reports are not just describing an unusually large bird. Some witnesses describe something that feels almost prehistoric. Long necks, strange wing structures, massive bodies, and movements that people say do not resemble modern birds at all. And that is where the conversation starts drifting into one of the most fascinating theories connected to the Thunderbird legend. The idea that some kind of prehistoric creature may have somehow survived long past extinction. One animal that gets brought up consistently in these discussions is the teratorn, a real prehistoric bird that once lived throughout parts of North America, including regions where modern Thunderbird sightings still happen today. Teratorns are believed to have had wingspans reaching over 12 feet and likely behaved similarly to large vultures or scavenger birds, soaring for long distances without much wing flapping. And honestly, some of the descriptions do line up surprisingly well with modern accounts, especially the reports of dark coloration, huge soaring birds, and the ability to glide almost effortlessly through the sky. The thing is, even a teratorn still would not fully explain some of the more extreme Thunderbird sightings. A 12-foot wingspan is massive, but it's nowhere near the 20, 40, or even 70-foot estimates some witnesses have claimed over the years. Still, the existence of real giant prehistoric birds does make the idea feel at least slightly less impossible than it first sounds. And it raises the question of whether people are simply misidentifying large modern birds, or if some sightings are tapping into something much older and much stranger. And because this was the very first episode of Out There, it only felt right to revisit it all these years later. Looking back on it now, it is honestly kind of crazy how many sightings, stories, and theories have continued to pop up since we first covered the Thunderbird. Whether these encounters are just misidentified birds, distorted perception, something prehistoric, or something we still cannot explain, one thing is very clear: people are still seeing something. And of course, since this is a revisit episode, we had to bring back a Weird Club to go along with it. So, next week, TJ joins me for a full Weird Club episode, where we are going even deeper into the Thunderbird, the theories surrounding it, and say exactly what we think is going on surrounding this iconic cryptid. So, what do you think? Is the Thunderbird really out there? Be sure to follow us on Instagram at OutThereCryptids for episode posts, updates, and more. Join our community on Discord where we dive even deeper into the mysteries we explore here on the podcast. The link can be found on our Instagram. And if you're loving the show, consider supporting us on Patreon. As a patron, you get exclusive perks like bonus episodes, early access, and even surprises. See you next week.